The fleet of the Galactic Empire surged toward the small human colony of Arcturus V, a mining world nestled in the outer rim. From the viewports of their colossal warships, the Imperial officers watched as their fleet grew closer, their eyes cold and calculating. The humans, in their arrogance, believed they could resist. But the Empire had never truly been challenged before. Arcturus V was nothing more than a speck in the grand scheme of things, and the Empire would wipe it out, like it had done to so many others. On the surface of Arcturus V, the once vibrant colony was now a ghost town. The Empire had already deployed its elite shock troops, lethal, swift, and efficient. Area Holt, the colony's lead defense commander, stood atop a hill, watching the battle unfold below. The ground shook with each explosion, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of burning debris. The humans, though fiercely determined, stood no chance against the might of the Empire. As her soldiers fell around her, Aria's heart pounded in her chest. She refused to surrender, even as their weapons were being shredded by Imperial blasters. Desperation turned to fury as the Imperial soldiers advanced. Aria's thoughts were scattered, focusing on the enemy in front of her, but also on the faces of the family she had sworn to protect. "Hold your ground," Aria shouted into the chaos, her voice hoarse from shouting over the gunfire. The humans, many of them civilians who had taken up arms in defense of their home, tried to fight back with whatever weapons they had. But the Empire's stormtroopers were unstoppable, advancing with precision and overwhelming firepower. Then, without warning, the ground beneath her feet trembled with the roar of Imperial warships descending into the atmosphere. They were here to finish the job. The sky above turned black as massive ships blotted out the stars, their engines humming with power as they opened fire, annihilating the remaining defenses with ease. One by one, Aria's comrades fell. The battle, once full of resolve and hope, had become an unstoppable tide of destruction. Aria stumbled backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her hand clutching the rifle that had served as her last line of defense. A blast from a nearby Imperial cannon sent her flying across the ground, the world spinning around her. For a moment, she could only hear the ringing in her ears, the distant crackle of the Empire's weapons tearing through the colony. When the world finally slowed, she found herself lying in the mud, blood dripping from a gash on her forehead. But the pain was nothing compared to the fire of vengeance that ignited within her. From her prone position, she glimpsed the city one last time. Now nothing but a smoldering crater. The Empire had won this battle, but Aria Holt knew one thing: humanity would not go down without a fight. Her eyes narrowed, and with a trembling hand, she picked herself up from the ground, each movement fueled by the faces of the innocent lives lost today. "No," she whispered under her breath. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." As she limped away from the destruction, determination set in like iron. Humanity would rise, and when they did, the Empire would regret underestimating them. In the days following the destruction of Arcturus V, Aria Holt's name became a whispered legend across the galaxy. Survivors of the battle had scattered, carrying the message of the Empire's brutal aggression to every corner of human space. The spark had been lit. Now it was a question of whether it would spread. Aria's voice, once only heard by a few, now echoed across the shattered human colonies as a rallying cry for vengeance and hope. Aria sat in the darkened command center of a stolen freighter, looking over the schematics of the Imperial warships she'd managed to capture. Her fingers hovered over the controls as her mind raced, her thoughts weighed down by the enormity of what had happened. But one thing was clear: the fight was far from over. "Captain Holt," came a voice from the doorway, snapping her from her reverie. She turned to see Kellen Jace, a former Imperial officer who had defected after witnessing the Empire's atrocities firsthand. His pale eyes were filled with concern, but his voice was steady. "The comms network is alive. They're listening." Aria didn't hesitate. She'd been expecting this. The network had been set up as a long shot, a faint signal that might catch the attention of other human colonies who hadn't yet fallen under Imperial control. Every human settlement was isolated in its own way, whether by distance or lack of resources, but word of the Empire's brutality was spreading, and the time to act had come. "We'll make them listen," Arya said with a fierce resolve. She turned back to the screen and pressed a few keys, the map of the human colonies flickering into view. "We've got no time to waste. We need to hit them fast and hard." Kellen crossed the room and stood by her side, his fingers tapping on the console. "We have allies out there, don't we? There are systems, smaller worlds that we could liberate to rally the others. You know this will be a long war, Arya. It's not just about survival anymore. It's about uniting every person who still has the strength to fight." Arya looked at him, her gaze steady but filled with pain. She nodded. "I know. We'll need everything we can get. Weapons, ships, resources. But most importantly, we need hearts and minds. Every colony we liberate, every soldier we inspire will send a message. The Empire's reach ends here." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared mission sinking in. The galaxy was on the brink of chaos, but for the first time since the fall of Arcturus V, Arya could see a path forward. It wasn't clear, and it wasn't easy, but it was there. With a determined glance at the map, she spoke again. "We start with the Kaldar system. It's not heavily fortified, but they have the resources we need. If we can liberate it, we can turn it into a staging ground. Then we hit the Empire where it hurts." Kellen's lips curled into a thin smile. "And from there, we push back. We make them remember that humanity doesn't die quietly." The Kaldar system, a strategic outpost on the fringes of Empire space, had been one of the first to experience imperial oppression. Its people, once proud of their independence, had long been subjected to imperial rule, though they still maintained their will to resist. Arya had heard rumors that a small faction of freedom fighters had been holding out on Kaldar, waiting for a sign to rise up. With a final nod to Kellen, Arya activated the comms network, sending out a call for help to all nearby colonies. As the message went out across the stars, she couldn't help but feel the first true stirrings of hope in her heart. The fleet of reckoning had begun. Now all they had to do was survive long enough to make the Empire regret its decision to destroy them. The fleet of reckoning grew slowly but steadily, a patchwork collection of ships, stolen Imperial technology, and makeshift fighters that barely held together under the strain of constant repairs. Arya Holt, once a simple captain defending her home, had become the symbol of humanity's defiance, the unyielding spirit around which the fleet had coalesced. Each victory, no matter how small, brought new faces to her cause, but the stakes were higher now. Time was running out, and the Empire was beginning to take notice. In the Kaldar system, the first step of Arya's bold plan was coming to fruition. The small band of freedom fighters, a network of humans who had lived in the shadows for years, had finally decided to take action. It was a fragile alliance, one born of desperation, but it was enough to get them started. Arya stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Indomitable, watching as their fleet began its final approach to Kaldar. The glow of distant stars reflected off the cold glass of the viewport, a silent reminder of how far they had come. The flagship was an old cruiser, patched together and repurposed, but in Arya's hands it was a symbol of humanity's grit, a far cry from the polished, impervious ships of the Empire. Beside her, Kellen Jace was hunched over a console, his fingers dancing over the keys as he monitored the progress of their mission. "Intel's coming through. The Empire's aware we're here," he said without looking up. "They're already sending a fleet to intercept us. We won't have much time before they arrive." Arya's lips tightened into a grim line. The Empire was always one step ahead. They had underestimated humanity before, but this time, they wouldn't get the chance to strike first. "Activate all frequencies," Arya ordered. "I want every ship in position, every gunman ready. We strike hard, we strike fast. Kaldar belongs to us now." A flurry of activity filled the bridge as her orders were carried out. The ship's crew scrambled to prepare for the imminent confrontation, and the fleet began to move into position. Area had calculated this would be their best chance, a bold strike against the Empire's fragile hold over the system. If they succeeded, it would be a signal to the galaxy that humanity was not only fighting back, but had the capacity to win. Kellen turned to her, his expression taut with tension. "Are you sure about this, Area? We're taking a big risk. A fleet of this size. If the Empire sends reinforcements, we could be finished before we even get started." Aria's eyes never left the viewport as she watched the stars streak by. "If we don't take risks now, we'll never get anywhere. We have one shot to show the galaxy that humanity is worth fighting for. And if we fall here, then we fall together." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of her words. Kellen's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Understood. A red light blinked urgently on the command console, and a voice crackled over the comms. "Imperial fleet detected. They're moving in fast, Captain. We have less than 15 minutes before they arrive." Aria's heartbeat quickened. The Empire had underestimated their speed, and it was exactly what they needed. "Deploy the fighters. Full engagement in 5 minutes. I want every ship to take up strategic positions. We fight with everything we have." Her heart pounded as she gave the final command. The fleet of scrappy ships, all too used to evading Imperial detection, began their maneuvers, taking up positions that were far from conventional. They didn't have the luxury of waiting for the perfect moment. The Empire's fleet was already approaching, and every second counted. The battle was about to begin. The battle for Calder began with an explosion that shook the very foundation of the system. Aria's fleet moved in with calculated precision, each ship in its place, each fighter in the sky. The Empire's fleet, a much larger force, moved in to intercept, but Aria's forces had one advantage. They knew the terrain. The Kaldar system was rich in asteroid fields and debris from long-forgotten battles, a perfect place to launch surprise attacks and disappear before the enemy could retaliate. Aria stood at the helm of the Indomitable, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair as the ship surged forward into the fray. The view from the viewport was a stunning sight. Distant stars and the swirling debris of the asteroid belt, all lit by the fiery explosions of their opening salvo against the Imperial fleet. The Indomitable swerved between massive chunks of rock, her guns firing with precision at an Imperial cruiser too slow to evade. "Enemy ship in our range, Captain," called Kellen, his eyes scanning the monitors. "They're trying to flank us from the left. We've got to move, now." Aria didn't hesitate. Shields to full power, evasive maneuvers, fire at will. Her voice rang out over the comms, a beacon of control amidst the chaos. The Indomitable veered left, narrowly missing an incoming torpedo. The ship's cannons fired back, a blast that tore through the hull of the Imperial cruiser, sending debris floating into space. The first blood had been drawn. But the Empire was no slouch. Their fleet retaliated with a fury that could only come from years of dominance and arrogance. Star destroyers and dreadnoughts loomed large, their weapons cutting through the battlefield like a hot knife through butter. The Empire's superior numbers began to press in on Aria's fleet, and it wasn't long before the first human ship went down in flames. On the bridge of the Indomitable, the crew was in overdrive. The shields flickered under heavy fire, and the hull groaned with each impact. Aria's eyes never left the viewports, watching as the battle unfolded around them, the distant stars now obscured by the smoke and fire of war. "Casualties incoming," reported the communications officer, a young recruit with a look of determination in her eyes. "A cruiser from the Arcturus Battalion, destroyed. Another ship damaged in Sector 6. Aria's heart clenched at the loss, but there was no time for grief. The Empire would show no mercy, and neither would she. "We hold our ground," Aria shouted, her voice rising above the din of the battle. "Push them back. Don't let them take Calder." Her command was met with a roar of agreement from her crew. The rebels, though outmatched, fought with a fury born of desperation and a thirst for revenge. Every ship, Every crew member had a personal stake in this fight. Families destroyed, homes shattered, entire colonies wiped from the stars. The Empire had brought them to this point, and now they would taste the cost of their cruelty. On the ground, Kaldar's freedom fighters were engaged in a fierce ground battle against the Empire's occupation forces. As the human fleet rained fire from above, the soldiers on the surface pushed forward, using the debris as cover to launch guerrilla-style attacks against the Imperial forces. The soldiers, many of them former miners, knew the terrain better than anyone and fought with the rage of those who had nothing left to lose. Despite the odds, the tide was slowly turning. The Imperial ships began to show signs of strain as Aria's forces targeted their weak points: engines, weapon systems, communications. They were relentless, and the Empire, for all its might, was beginning to show cracks. But the Empire's counterattack was swift and brutal. A massive Imperial warship, the Vanguard, moved into the heart of the battle, its formidable weapons trained on the Indomitable. The odds of survival against such a behemoth seemed slim. Aria gritted her teeth as the enemy ship fired, sending a barrage of energy blasts in their direction. "Brace for impact," Kellen yelled, but Aria's voice cut through the panic like steel. "Not today," she muttered, her eyes narrowing as she made a split-second decision. "All ships, form up. We're not running." With that, she executed a bold maneuver, diving the Indomitable straight into the path of the Vanguard's fire, ducking behind a larger asteroid for cover. The human fleet scattered, using the chaos to engage the Empire at close range. It was a dangerous, desperate tactic, but in that moment, it was their only option. And in that moment, it became clear: humanity would not be erased so easily. The battle raged on for hours, with both sides locked in a brutal contest for control of the Kaldar system. The Empire's might, once thought invincible, was now being tested by the unwavering resolve of Aria Holt and her Ragdig fleet. The Imperial warships, though powerful and numerous, had underestimated the tenacity of humanity, their ability to fight with desperation and fire that came from losing everything. The Indomitable was now covered in scorch marks, its hull weakened by repeated hits. The shields flickered in and out of operation, but Aria refused to back down. The battle was still far from won, and the Empire had sent reinforcements. A second wave of dreadnoughts, led by the Vanguard, was closing in fast, the giant ship's weapons lighting up with deadly force. Aria knew they couldn't withstand much longer. "Captain, the Vanguard is bearing down on us," Kellen reported, his voice tight. "If we don't act fast, we'll be overwhelmed. Our shields won't last another round of those blasts." Aria's mind raced, calculating the odds. Her ship was battered, but it could still move, just barely. It wasn't the first time she'd faced impossible odds, and this wasn't about to be the last. "Give me an open line to the fleet," she commanded. "Now." The communications officer nodded and activated the network, broadcasting Aria's voice across the entire fleet. "All ships, listen up," she said, her tone strong, but tinged with urgency. "The Vanguard is our primary target. We need to focus everything on taking that ship down. We're not backing down now. We'll fight till the end, and we will make the Empire feel our fury." There was a pause, then a series of affirmations and battle cries came in over the comms. Aria could hear the hope in their voices, the defiance that had come to define them. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to show the galaxy that they could stand tall against an empire that had once crushed entire civilizations. "We need to draw their fire," Aria continued. "Prepare to execute a pincer movement. Smaller ships distract the Vanguard's fire. The heavier cruisers focus on those weak points. We've studied their systems. We know where their shields are thin." As the fleet began to coordinate the attack, Aria's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her focus. The Indomitable shot forward, weaving through debris and wreckage as enemy fire peppered the ship. The asteroid fields around them now looked more like a battlefield, littered with the remains of both sides. The sky, once pristine, was now darkened with the burning remains of fallen ships. Then, like a spark in the dark, the tide began to turn. A smaller rebel ship, a former freighter converted into a light cruiser, darted in front of the vanguard, drawing its fire away from the larger vessels. It was a move that would surely be suicidal, but the crew of that ship understood their mission. They were not going to run. They were fighting for something bigger. The move created the opening they needed. A heavier cruiser, the Revolution, fired a full barrage of laser blasts at the Vanguard's vulnerable engines, sending ripples through the massive ship's defenses. The Vanguard groaned, and its shields faltered. "We've got them," Kellen said, his voice filled with awe. "The shields are down. Now's our chance." Area didn't hesitate. "All ships, concentrate fire on the Vanguard. Now." The Rebel fleet, despite their meager numbers, unleashed a barrage of firepower. Area watched as the Vanguard's hull buckled under the relentless assault, explosions rippling across its massive surface. Every ship, every fighter, every human on the ground who had fought and bled for this moment had brought them here. The Empire was losing its grip. A final shot from the Indomitable, a direct hit to the Vanguard's central reactor, sent a shockwave through the battlefield. The massive Imperial warship erupted in a fiery explosion, its immense frame disintegrating into a cloud of debris. The remaining Imperial forces hesitated, their morale shaken as the mighty Vanguard was reduced to nothing more than space dust. Area allowed herself a breath of relief, but only for a moment. "Stay sharp," she ordered. "This isn't over yet. We've made a dent, but the Empire won't back down. Not yet." Kellen gave her a grim nod. "But today, Captain, we've shown them something. We've shown them that humanity will never kneel." The comms erupted with cheers, and Area felt the weight of their victory settle over her. It wasn't the end of the war, not by a long shot. But this battle had shown them that they were no longer fighting an impossible fight. The Empire's grip was loosening, and the spark that had ignited on Kaldar was now a fire that was spreading across the galaxy. The victory at Kaldar was more than just a tactical win. It was a rallying cry that reverberated across the galaxy. News of the Vanguard's destruction and the defeat of the Empire's fleet spread quickly, sparking something in the hearts of humans everywhere. The Fleet of Reckoning had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could still strike back, still stand against the Empire's cruelty and oppression. Area sat on the bridge of the Indomitable, her fingers pressing into the armrests of her command chair. The crew, though exhausted from the battle, was filled with a new sense of determination. They had accomplished the impossible. But in Area's heart, there was no time for celebration. This was just the beginning. The Empire would not be content with just losing one ship, one fleet. They would retaliate. "Captain." Kellen's voice cut through her thoughts. He stood at the console, his brow furrowed as he studied the latest reports. "We've received messages from multiple systems, survivors, rebel groups. They're asking for help. The message from Kaldar has ignited something in them. They want to fight." Area nodded, her expression unreadable. "And we'll give them that fight," she replied. "But we need to stay smart. We can't risk spreading ourselves too thin. We need to consolidate our strength, hit where it hurts. But if we wait too long, the Empire will regroup," Kellen pressed. "They'll come back stronger. If we can capitalize on this momentum, we could recruit more ships, more systems. The people are hungry for a victory like this." She met his gaze, her eyes hardening. "And if we stretch too far, we risk losing everything we've gained. We need to hit key systems, weaken their hold on supply lines. We need to hit them where it hurts, where they don't expect it." The decision weighed heavily on her, but she was no stranger to tough calls. Area knew that every move from here on out would be crucial. The victory at Kaldar had given them a chance, but only if they were smart about it. "I want a list of the top 5 targets," she said after a long pause. "We hit them hard, then we consolidate. We need supplies, reinforcements, and intelligence. Our people need hope, and we'll give it to them." The crew worked quickly, compiling a list of vulnerable Imperial strongholds and systems they could target. Each strike would send a clear message to the Empire. Humanity was no longer a disjointed group of refugees. It was a force to be reckoned with. Meanwhile, the communications network was alive with activity. Rebel groups from every corner of the galaxy were reaching out, emboldened by Keldar's victory. The galaxy, once steeped in silence and fear, now hummed with the sound of people ready to rise up. In the midst of the chaos, a soft voice interrupted the flurry of activity. "Captain, you have a secure message from the High Command of the Colonial Coalition," the comms officer announced. Aria looked up, her curiosity piqued. She had heard rumors of the Coalition, a powerful faction of human governments who had kept their distance from the war until now. They were the last of the great human coalitions, and their involvement could turn the tide of the war. "Patch it through," Aria ordered. The screen flickered, and a familiar face appeared, Admiral Lena Tyrell, the leader of the Colonial Coalition. Her expression was grim but resolute. "Captain Holt," she began, her voice firm. "The Coalition has been monitoring your success at Kaldar. It's clear that you've sparked something big. We're prepared to offer you our full support, but we need to discuss terms. A unified effort will require coordination. You've earned the Coalition's trust, Captain, but we must be strategic." Aria's mind raced. The prospect of an alliance with the Coalition was both a blessing and a risk. The Coalition's resources could turn the tide of the war, but their involvement would also mean navigating political minefields and negotiating the terms of their cooperation. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. "We're ready for that discussion, Admiral," Aria said. "But the fight's already begun. We'll be ready to move forward together." As the transmission ended, Aria looked at her crew, the weight of what lay ahead settling in. This was a pivotal moment, not just for the Fleet of Reckoning, but for all of humanity. The galaxy was on the brink of something monumental. The spark had ignited, and now the flames of rebellion were spreading across the stars. But Aria knew that the Empire would not give up without a fight. The real war was just beginning. The stars outside the Indomitables bridge twinkled quietly, a stark contrast to the storm that was gathering within the galaxy. The message from Admiral Tyrell of the Colonial Coalition had given Aria a sense of cautious optimism. An alliance with the Coalition meant access to resources and a well-organized network of systems that could truly tip the scales against the Empire. But with that optimism came uncertainty. Trust, especially in the face of war, was fragile, and the Coalition's involvement would come with its own set of challenges. Yet, despite the risks, Aria couldn't afford to waste time second-guessing herself. The war was escalating quickly, and the Empire had already shown that they would stop at nothing to maintain their control. As she gazed out at the vastness of space, she couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was lurking, something that was not just about the fight, but about the fate of the galaxy itself. "Captain, we've got movement." Kellen's voice interrupted her thoughts. He was monitoring the fleet's systems with his usual sharp focus. "Imperial reinforcements are moving toward the core worlds. They're not wasting time." Aria turned to face him, a sinking feeling settling in her stomach. "They're preparing for a counteroffensive." "Yes," Kellen said. "And it looks like they've mobilized the Black Hand, the Empire's most elite special forces. If they're involved, this will be no ordinary battle." The Black Hand was a name spoken in hushed tones, a unit feared for their ruthlessness and efficiency. Trained in the deadliest combat tactics, these soldiers were the Empire's final solution to any insurrection. Their involvement meant that the Empire wasn't just retaliating, it was sending its best to crush the rebellion once and for all. Aria swallowed her fear, forcing herself to remain calm. "We need to move fast. If we give them time to regroup, we'll be fighting a war on multiple fronts. Kellen, send a message to the Coalition. We need their help to hit key Imperial supply routes. That'll give us an opening." She paused for a moment, then added, and get the fleet ready for a defensive maneuver. The Black Hand doesn't play by the same rules as the rest of the Empire. Kellen nodded, his expression grim as he relayed the orders. The Indomitable and its fleet had become a symbol of rebellion, but they weren't invincible. The loss of Kaldar had stung the Empire, but the true power of the Imperial war machine was still something to be reckoned with. And now, with the Black Hand on their way, the stakes had risen dramatically. Meanwhile, in the bowels of the ship, the rest of the crew was preparing for what they knew could be their most dangerous mission yet. Soldiers in the corridors adjusted their weapons, technicians worked frantically to ensure their systems were ready, and engineers made last-minute repairs to the battered ships that had survived the battle for Kaldar. As Aria walked through the narrow corridors of the Indomitable, her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice calling her name. She turned to see Lieutenant Mara Silas, the ship's tactical officer, approaching her with a datapad in hand. "Captain," Mara said, her expression serious, "we've intercepted an Imperial transmission. It's from the Valkyrie, the flagship of the Black Hand. They've been given orders to eliminate the resistance, and they're targeting us specifically." Aria's heart skipped a beat. The Valkyrie was the Empire's flagship for special operations, a sleek warship designed to handle the most dangerous of missions. If the Black Hand was coming for them, this wouldn't be just another skirmish. It would be an all-out war for survival. "How long until they arrive?" Aria asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Less than a day," Mara replied. "They're moving fast. We won't have much time to prepare." Aria took a deep breath, her mind racing. They had no choice but to face the Valkyrie head-on. A defensive battle wasn't an option. They had to strike first, and strike hard. If they didn't, the Black Hand would show no mercy. She turned back to the window, her eyes narrowing as she watched the stars. This was no longer just a fight for survival. This was a fight to send a message. Humanity would not be intimidated, and they would not kneel. "We fight, and we win," she muttered under her breath. "Captain," Mara asked, concerned. "We strike them before they can reach us," Aria said, turning to face her officers. "Prepare the fleet. We're going after the Valkyrie." The room fell silent. Everyone understood the gravity of what she was saying. This wouldn't be easy, but humanity had come too far to back down now. The countdown had begun. The next battle would be the fiercest yet. The silence before the storm was almost palpable. The Indomitable and its ragtag fleet drifted in the black void of space, their engines idle as the crew prepared for the greatest battle they had ever faced. It was not just a fight for survival now. It was a fight to prove that humanity could not be crushed by the Empire. The Black Hand was coming, and with them, the full wrath of the Empire's elite forces. Aria stood at the center of the command bridge, staring at the star charts before her. The Valkyrie, the flagship of the Black Hand, was approaching rapidly, its sleek form cutting through the stars like a predator closing in on its prey. The clock was ticking. They had no time to waste. If they didn't act fast, the Valkyrie would arrive in hours, and with it, an unstoppable force. "Captain," Kellen said, his voice calm yet filled with urgency. "The fleet is ready. We've got everyone in position. Smaller ships are on standby, ready to provide diversions. The larger cruisers are set to engage once we draw them into range." Aria nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She could feel the weight of the decisions she had to make pressing down on her. She had led her crew to victory before, but this would be their toughest challenge yet. The Black Hand wasn't just a fleet. It was a symbol of the Empire's darkest power. To defeat them would send a message to the galaxy. But to lose now, to lose would mean the end of humanity's struggle. "Let's not waste their time," she said, her voice steely and determined. "We engage them before they can make their move. We'll hit them hard and fast." No hesitation. Kellen met her gaze, understanding the gravity of her words. "Understood." With a final glance toward the crew, Aria turned to the view screen. The Valkyrie was now within firing range, its dark silhouette unmistakable against the backdrop of distant stars. The time for hesitation was over. The Indomitable's engines roared to life, and the ship shot forward, followed closely by the rest of the fleet. The battle for humanity's future had begun. The first salvo from the Valkyrie was like thunder, ripping through the empty void as the Empire's flagship fired a barrage of energy blasts toward Aria's fleet. The rebel ships scattered, dodging and weaving through the barrage as they returned fire, their weapons lighting up the darkness with bright streaks of light. It was a chaotic dance, rebels and Imperials alike maneuvering in the deadly ballad of war. "Shields are holding, but just barely," shouted one of the officers, panic creeping into their voice as the ship shook with another blast. Aria's mind was focused, each decision a matter of life and death. "Status report, Kellen." "The Valkyrie is too powerful," Kellen said, his voice tight. "We've taken some heavy damage already, but we're drawing them into position. Our smaller ships are distracting their flanks, but we need more time." "Then we give it to them," Aria said, her voice unwavering. She tapped a series of commands into the console. "Prepare the decoy drones. Once they're in range, we'll send them in for a strike on the Valkyrie's engines. We don't need to destroy them, just disable them long enough to give us an opening." The crew moved quickly, carrying out Aria's orders with the precision that had come to define them. The decoy drones, a set of small, agile ships designed to draw enemy fire and mislead sensors, were launched into space. They buzzed around the Valkyrie, distracting the Imperial flagship long enough to allow Aria's fleet to regroup and position themselves for the decisive blow. The Valkyrie fired again, this time aiming for the heart of the rebel formation. But Aria had anticipated this move. At the last possible moment, she commanded the fleet to split, pulling the Indomitable into a sharp turn while the other ships launched a concentrated barrage of laser fire straight at the Valkyrie's exposed starboard side. It was a gamble. Fighting the Black Hand head-on was suicide for anyone without the right resources, but humanity had never been known for playing it safe. The moment of impact was as glorious as it was terrifying. The Valkyrie shuddered as the barrage hit its hull, the force of the explosion sending ripples through the ship's structure. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed as though the unthinkable was possible. The Valkyrie was faltering. But as the smoke cleared, Aria's eyes widened. The Valkyrie was still standing, barely, and it was preparing to unleash its full wrath. "We've got one shot left, Captain," Kellen said, his voice thick with urgency. "If we don't disable their engines now, we're finished." Aria felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a cold hand. There would be no retreat. This was it, the final gambit. She turned to her crew, determination in her eyes. "All ships, give them everything we've got," she commanded. "This ends today." With a roar, the rebel fleet surged forward, unleashing the last of their firepower into the heart of the Valkyrie.